A black woman quietly checks in for her first-class flight. Hours later, the entire airline loses $280 million in investment. No scandal. No press. Just one mistake. They didn't know who she was. This story is not about revenge. It's about power, silent, cold, and precise. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear is a story that's been lived too many times, in too many places. And this time, someone was watching. Before we begin, drop a comment to let us know where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, if you've ever felt unseen in a place you paid to be, don't forget to subscribe for more. It was just an ordinary Thursday. The automatic glass doors at Orion International Airport slid open with a hiss, releasing a gust of air laced with jet fuel, reheated croissants, and tired ambition. Sienna Brooks stepped inside without ceremony. Her sneakers, gray, worn, unassuming, crossed the threshold like they had no story to tell. A scuffed black carry-on rolled quietly behind her, and a faded backpack weighed her shoulder. She wore a white t-shirt softened by too many washes, and a simple leather bracelet wrapped around her wrist. The kind of accessory you'd never suspect was worth more to her than the net worth of half the people she was about to encounter. To anyone watching, she was background static, a traveler like any other. And that was precisely the point. Sienna liked it this way. In a world so obsessed with performance, with status symbols and silent battles of dominance in queues and lounges, she preferred the invisibility of understatement. She had spent the last 7 years fine-tuning her neutrality, never overdressed, never underprepared, always poised just enough to be forgettable. Because when people forgot you, they revealed themselves. And when people revealed themselves, you learned exactly where to strike. She wasn't flying for leisure or for ego. She was flying to Zurich for a board meeting, one that would determine the future of a hydrogen fuel initiative projected to redefine clean aviation. On paper, she was the managing partner of Bastion Equity. In practice, she was the final word. And the only reason the deal hadn't been closed yet was because she liked watching people blink twice when they realized the future had a black face and wore thrifted denim. Her 7:30 p.m. flight was still 2 hours out when she arrived. She liked to be early, not to sit around sipping champagne, but because timing was leverage. The earlier you showed up, the more time they had to show you exactly who they thought you were. She approached the first-class check-in counter, eyes flicking briefly toward the digital wallet on her phone. Bastion Equity had handled the booking through a corporate blockchain ledger. The seat was 2A, window, extra legroom, close to the exit for a swift disembark. For most people, first class was indulgence. For her, it was tactical. The attendant at the counter didn't look up immediately. When she did, her smile faded fast. Not fully, just enough. The kind of subtle withdrawal that was barely perceptible to the untrained eye. But Sienna had trained her eye long ago. She could tell when a smile was replaced by suspicion before it even finished curling. "Can I help you?" the woman asked. Her voice was dipped in politeness, but her eyes were already scanning clothes, hair, luggage, inventorying the inconsistency between the traveler and the seat she claimed to own. Sienna handed over her passport and phone. "Sienna Brooks. Zurich. First class." The woman took them but hesitated. Her brows furrowed as she glanced at the screen. "This ticket is for first class?" she asked, more out of disbelief than clarification. "Yes," Sienna answered, her tone as smooth and frictionless as the polished floor beneath her feet. "Do you have another form of payment? Or perhaps a loyalty number?" "No," Sienna replied, unfazed. "The payment was made via corporate ledger transfer. It should be under Bastion Equity Partners." The attendant blinked. Her fingers moved, typing something, then she picked up the phone and whispered into it, just out of earshot. Sienna waited. She'd been here before. Not in this specific terminal, not with this exact woman, but in this exact script. The disbelief. The quiet consultation. The performative smile trying to cover the instinctual recoil. It always played out the same way, as though access had to be verified not by software, but by subconscious bias. A tall man in a navy suit stepped up beside her. Rolex peeking from his cuff, hair carefully disheveled. The same attendant lit up like a switch. "Mr. Langford. Headed to Geneva again? Let me just print this for you real quick." He was handed his boarding pass before she finished speaking. No questions. No second scan. Sienna's phone buzzed. A message from her assistant. "Zurich team confirms board meeting at 10 a.m. Board rep will be present. You have full proxy." She responded with a single thumbs-up emoji. Calm. Clean. Just like she always was. Moments later, the attendant turned back to her. "We've confirmed your payment," she said, the tension behind her teeth barely disguised. "Here's your boarding pass, Ms. Brooks." Sienna took it with a nod. Then came the tagline, the verbal bow on the package of quiet condescension. "You understand how things are these days," the woman said. "We just have to be careful. You'd be surprised how many people try to sneak into first class." Sienna's expression didn't change. Her eyes locked onto the woman's for a beat longer than comfort allowed. "I'm not surprised," she said flatly. Then she walked away. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't make a scene. She just stored the moment away, one more pin in a map of predictable prejudice. The TSA checkpoint wasn't any better. Another scan. Another sideways glance. Another random secondary check. She removed her shoes, her belt, her watch. They patted her down like she was a weapon wrapped in cotton. Her bag was rifled through. Her hardware wallet inspected like it was a bomb. "You carry a lot of tech," the officer noted, holding up her crypto wallet. "It's a cold storage device," she replied. "Crypto," he said, eyebrows up. "You some kind of Bitcoin girl?" She didn't respond. He smiled like he was making a joke. He wasn't. And she wasn't laughing. They ran explosives tests. Delayed her by 8 minutes. Said it was policy. She said nothing. She didn't need to say anything. Power, when wielded correctly, doesn't need to shout. It just waits. It collects data. And when the moment is right, it moves. By the time she reached the lounge, she knew the pattern would continue. It always did. The receptionist's eyes flicked down to her sneakers before accepting her boarding pass. No greeting. No offer of assistance. She was told the elite dining area was full. She was directed to a side buffet that had neither wine lists nor menus. She waited 15 minutes. No one offered her water. So she stood up, adjusted her backpack, and walked out. The carpet muffled her footsteps, but the silence she carried was thunderous. Every moment, every microaggression was adding up, not in rage, not in sorrow, but in data. And when enough data accumulates, the system breaks. They didn't know it yet, but they had just made their final mistake. And she, quiet, measured, deliberate, was about to become the reckoning they'd never seen coming. Sienna's steps echoed faintly as she left the lounge and headed toward the main terminal. The scent of overpriced perfume and roasted almonds clung to her clothes like a bad memory. She didn't look back. She never did. There was nothing behind her worth remembering, only the soft corrosion of dignity in spaces that smiled as they denied you service. Her boarding pass was tucked into the sleeve of her phone, a digital reminder that she belonged, at least on paper. Gate A12 was still 30 minutes from boarding. She chose a seat near the window, angled slightly away from the crowd. Through the glass, a jet engine blinked in quiet rhythm beneath a soft Zurich-bound sunset. Everything outside looked calm, calculated, industrial. Inside, however, tension thrummed beneath her skin like the faint buzz of static before a storm. The kind of tension that didn't announce itself but built over time, like pressure in the fuselage. Passengers trickled in. A mother with twin toddlers juggling sippy cups and fatigue. 2 corporate suits arguing softly about mergers. An older woman with a Chanel tote and a furrowed brow, scanning for something beneath her station. Everyone was busy, everyone was tired, and yet somehow, everyone had enough time to glance at Sienna, then look away just fast enough to pretend they hadn't. She didn't mind the glances. She minded the pauses that followed. The subtle hesitation. That half-second recalibration. The look that said, "Wait, what's she doing here?" Not out of malice, but out of instinct. Her phone buzzed again. A text from her assistant. Client-side projections locked. Zurich meeting still confirmed. CEO joining unexpectedly. "You ready?" Sienna didn't respond immediately. She stared at the message for a moment, her thumb hovering above the screen. But the word landed like a pin dropped in a mausoleum. He nodded, still smiling. Still not blinking. Sienna stepped aside. The secondary podium was just far enough to be out of the main line, but not out of sight. A clever placement, close enough for others to watch, far enough to pretend it wasn't a scene. Another staffer sat behind a terminal, typing without looking up. "Name?" he asked flatly. "Sienna Brooks." "Zurich. First class." The agent beside her handed over her boarding pass. "Just verifying the payment method," he said to his colleague. A few keystrokes. A pause. "Purchase cleared," the seated agent said. "No holds. No alerts." The first agent hesitated. "Double-check the payment channel. Any digital wallet IDs or corporate triggers?" The seated one shrugged. Crypto-backed fund. Bastion equity. It's in order. Crypto again. That word, always said with a tinge of suspicion, like she might be paying in Monopoly money. The standing agent looked back at her, the smile now replaced with a strange softness. Like he was trying to signal that none of this was personal. You know how it is, he offered. These newer payment methods raise eyebrows. Sienna didn't blink. No, she said. That's not how it is. That's how you've chosen to treat it. He cleared his throat, looked at the screen again, then nodded awkwardly. You're all set. Safe travels. She walked back toward the gate without another word. The velvet rope was lifted again. The scanner beeped again. This time no one stopped her. Must have been an error. The attendant turned back to Sienna. Would you mind taking 2C for today? It's the same class, same service. Sienna didn't answer right away. Letting the request hang was a strategy. Silence was her way of shining light on the absurdity. You're asking me to give up the seat I reserved, she said finally, so he doesn't have to move from the one he didn't. It would make boarding smoother, the attendant replied, her voice a little tighter now. And if I say no? The smile dimmed. Then we'll need to ask him to move. But that may delay departure. Sienna exhaled slowly. She sat in 2C. Not because she agreed, but because she understood the board was already set. And she had more important moves to make. As the man in 2A reclined comfortably, she opened her folder. Zurich financials. Investment portfolios. Hydrogen projections. She read not to distract herself, but to refocus. Because the fight wasn't about comfort. Not yet. It was about timing. The drink cart came. Champagne was served to 2A. She wasn't offered anything. She didn't ask. But she made a mental note. Another data point. Another drop in the rising tide. And as the plane began its slow taxi toward the runway, a quiet thought surfaced behind her composed expression. Let them underestimate me one more time. It would be the last time they ever did. The plane hummed with anticipation as it left the runway, its nose lifting gently into the dusk-stained sky. The soft shift in gravity pulled Sienna deeper into her seat, but she remained upright, her hands folded calmly in her lap. Around her, the first-class cabin exhaled into relaxation, reclining chairs, clinking glasses, and the subtle lull of whispered conversations over cashmere blankets. She was surrounded by curated comfort. But it wasn't comfort she noticed, it was what was missing. Her welcome drink had never arrived. She watched as the flight attendant served petit fours and sparkling wine to the passenger across the aisle, who offered a grateful nod and a slight chuckle about the nicer perks of traveling alone. The attendant smiled back, then moved on without so much as glancing in Sienna's direction. A glass of champagne was placed delicately into the hand of the man in 2A, still seated in the chair that belonged to her. Still not a word. Not a question. Not a correction. Sienna didn't flinch. She didn't ask. As always, she simply observed. She made no attempt to call attention to the omissions, but she tracked each one with the precision of a surgeon, not because she was offended, but because she understood how systems worked. You don't change what you don't measure. And what was happening now, row by row, interaction by interaction, was measurable. The meal service began 15 minutes later. Linen tablecloths unfolded like rituals. Menus were handed out with the kind of delicate professionalism you only ever saw in spaces designed for the privileged. Sienna was the last to receive hers. It was dropped onto her tray with no introduction, no eye contact. Just a perfunctory placement, as if checking a box on a silent checklist. Yes, she exists. Barely. She opened the menu, scanning the options. The words were designed to impress. Seared filet mignon, grilled sea bass, wild mushroom risotto. The kind of dishes that told you this wasn't just dinner. It was a status affirmation. When the attendant returned to take orders, she leaned into the man in 2A first, her smile wide, her voice soft. And for you, sir? Filet. Medium rare. And the Bordeaux. Of course, she beamed. Then she turned to Sienna. The smile faded. The tone shifted, subtle but distinct. And you? I'll have the sea bass. Sparkling water. The attendant nodded wordlessly and turned away. No confirmation. No warmth. Just silence. 15 minutes passed. The meal for 2A arrived promptly, plated with precision and steaming gently under the cabin's warm lighting. Sienna's arrived 10 minutes later, lukewarm, the garnish sliding to one side as if tossed on during turbulence. The bread was missing. The wine non-existent. She didn't complain. She didn't request a correction. She simply placed her napkin in her lap, picked up her fork, and ate quietly. Her movements were controlled, precise. She knew how to navigate a table like a battlefield, because in many ways it was. Halfway through the meal, the turbulence began. A gentle rumble at first, then a more pronounced shake that caused a few passengers to clutch their armrests. I haven't violated any policies. I haven't left my seat. Yet I've been ignored during service, asked to change seats without cause, and now I'm being flagged as the source of discomfort. The young woman looked mortified. I'm so sorry, ma'am. You can relay this back, Sienna said calmly. I don't expect special treatment. I expect equal treatment. That's all. The young woman nodded, then turned and walked away. Sienna leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes, not to rest, but to recalibrate. Her breathing was slow, deliberate. She wasn't angry, not yet. Anger came from shock, from surprise. But none of this surprised her. This was the third act of a performance she'd seen in too many languages, too many uniforms, too many accents. A half hour passed in silence, the cabin lights dimming for the overnight portion of the flight. Around her, passengers began settling in. Seats reclined, slippers appeared, and champagne flutes clinked like lullabies. The man in 2A shifted in his seat, adjusting his blanket without offering a glance in her direction. Sienna stared straight ahead. Not at the screen, not at the meal tray, but at the tray table's reflection. It showed her enough. The woman across the aisle was whispering again, this time into the ear of a pearl-necklaced travel companion. They both glanced toward Sienna, then shared a thin smile. A look passed between them, one of amused confusion. She must be someone's assistant. She probably used points. She doesn't look the part. Sienna had heard them all. In conference rooms. In five-star lobbies. In penthouse lounges. And now, here, 30,000 feet in the air. She didn't reply. She never did. She knew that discomfort was the price some people paid when the rooms stopped looking the way they expected. Let them pay. Her fingers tapped the folder in her lap, still filled with Zurich documents. Numbers didn't judge. Balance sheets didn't make assumptions. Financial projections didn't ignore your drink order. They simply reflected what was. And soon, those numbers would become actions. Signatures. Decisions. And when that moment came, she would not need to raise her voice. She would simply withhold her pen. Outside the window, the sky had gone completely dark, the kind of darkness only seen above the clouds, quiet, infinite, unbothered. It suited her. In the next few hours, they would sleep. She would not. She was waiting for something they didn't know was coming. And when it arrived, they would have no one to blame but their own assumptions. The cabin was silent now, submerged in that peculiar stillness only found at cruising altitude. Most of the passengers in first class had reclined into sleep, swaddled in blankets, comforted by the illusion of luxury, unbothered by the subtleties of human error playing out just a few feet away. Somewhere over the Atlantic, the aircraft sliced through time zones and unspoken bias alike, and Sienna Brooks sat awake, her seat upright, her eyes open but distant. She wasn't restless. She was recording. Every omission, every half-smile, every delayed glass of water and withheld amenity had become part of an evolving case study. Not just for herself, but for the system. She had learned early in life that silence could be strategy, but only if you used it to listen, to observe the way people behaved when they believed they were unobserved. She looked to her right. The man in 2A, still nestled in the seat he had refused to vacate, was now dozing, his mouth slightly open, earbuds in. He had shifted twice during the flight, each time encroaching further into the space between them, as if the boundary of her presence was up for negotiation. He never asked. He just expanded, confident that no one would check him. Her gaze shifted to the overhead call button. She didn't press it. She didn't need to. Instead, she slowly reached under her seat and pulled out her backpack, unzipping the side compartment with practiced ease. Inside, tucked between a folder of contracts and a slimline tablet, was a black leather wallet, secure, discreet, and sealed with biometric verification. It wasn't for spending. It wasn't for show. It was her key, quite literally, to the infrastructure beneath this entire operation. She opened the tablet and connected to the onboard secure Wi-Fi. Not for browsing, just for signal. Logging into her secure channel required 3 forms of authentication. Thumbprint, passphrase, retinal scan via front-facing camera. Each layer unlocked silently, and when the screen lit up with the soft blue hue of her custom interface, she tapped a single contact, LMC. The initials stood for a private investment firm. The name was fake. The power behind it was not. The call connected with a soft chime. "Miss Brooks," a voice answered. Calm. Alert. No small talk. "I need to initiate a Level 2 readiness protocol," Sienna said. "Understood. Zurich timeline still intact?" "Yes," she said. "But there's been exposure." A brief silence. "Confirming. Financial breach?" "No," she replied. "Cultural. Reputational. And operational." Another pause. This one heavier. "Do we proceed with pause authority?" "Not yet," she said, her tone ice-cut and surgical. "But transfer executive access now. I'll hold the trigger until I land." Confirmed. Authority level updated. Full control now resides with you. Sienna didn't say thank you. That wasn't necessary. She ended the call, encrypted the data, and powered down the device. The future of a $280 million deal now sat quietly in her backpack, just beneath a blanket folded by a flight attendant who hadn't once met her eye. She exhaled, slow and steady, as if recalibrating her internal compass. Then, with the same grace she used in boardrooms and billion-dollar negotiations, she stood. The movement was quiet but noticeable. Not many people moved in first class at this hour. It drew a few half-lidded glances. A woman stirred. A man frowned lightly and shifted in his sleep. None of it mattered. She walked toward the galley. A young flight attendant was half-seated on the jump seat, scrolling through something on a small tablet, one earbud in. When he saw her, he stood too quickly, caught off guard. "Ma'am, is everything all right?" "I'm stepping off for a moment," she said calmly. The man blinked, confused. "We're in the air, ma'am." "I'm aware," she replied, then reached to her left and pressed her fingerprint against a small, unmarked panel near the flight deck's bulkhead. A green light flickered once. The panel clicked open, revealing a narrow corridor, no wider than her shoulders, leading to what looked like an equipment closet. It wasn't. It was a secure operations bay, reserved for executive use in the event of mid-air technical or investor emergencies. Most flight crew never even knew it existed. Sienna stepped inside, the door sliding shut behind her. Inside, the space was cold, silent, humming with digital life. A small terminal blinked on the far wall. She inserted a sleek black card into the reader slot, then placed her hand on a pad. The screen flared to life. "Welcome, Sienna Brooks Executive Access. Level 2 Crypto Ledger Sync in progress." She reviewed the screen for less than a minute. All systems in place. No external breaches. But every internal indicator, every line of experience and pattern recognition, told her it was time to make a move. Not drastic. Not loud. Just deliberate. She issued a single command. "PRE authorize. Phase 3 disbursement pause status. On hold pending review reason code. Operational integrity." The screen asked for confirmation. She placed her thumb on the reader again. The confirmation beeped. She removed the card. The screen went dark. The entire transaction had taken less than 5 minutes. She stepped back into the galley, where the flight attendant was still standing, visibly unnerved. "I'll be in my seat," she said. "Is everything?" "It's perfect," she replied, and returned to 2C with the grace of someone who had just rewritten the flight's trajectory, and no one else even noticed. As she sat down, the cabin seemed quieter. She didn't know if it had actually changed or if she had. Maybe both. The man in 2A stirred slightly, cracking one eye open. He glanced at her, as if sensing that something had happened, something just beyond his comprehension. But instead of asking, he looked away, reached for his half-empty wine glass, and settled back into sleep. Let him sleep. The truth would wake him soon enough. Sienna fastened her seatbelt and leaned back. Not to rest, but to wait. The storm had already begun. They just hadn't felt the wind yet. When the wheels of Flight 901 touched down in Zurich at precisely 8:42 a.m. local time, the soft screech of rubber against tarmac barely registered in Sienna's ears. She had remained still through the descent, watching the slow shift of the horizon through the narrow window 2 rows ahead. The sun broke gently through low clouds, casting a halo of warmth against the steel wing outside. It was an ordinary landing, uneventful by all standard measures. But within the cabin of first class, the temperature of the air was quietly different. Sienna unbuckled her belt with the same fluid calm she had maintained throughout the flight. Her movements betrayed no urgency, no frustration. She folded her travel folder closed, slipped her tablet back into her backpack, and stood as the cabin lights brightened to a polite amber. Her seatmate, still occupying 2A, stirred, stretching his arms lazily without acknowledging her presence. That was fine. His recognition was irrelevant now. What mattered was what waited beyond the gate. The cabin door opened with a quiet mechanical sigh, and the first wave of passengers began their practiced shuffle toward the exit. Designer scarves were adjusted, passports checked, Bluetooth headsets reconnected as people reassembled their corporate armor for the day ahead. Sienna stood among them, not behind, not ahead, simply present. But unlike the others, she didn't check her phone for notifications or updates. She already knew what would come next. At the mouth of the jet bridge, just past the smiling flight crew who now avoided her gaze, stood a man in a dark navy suit. His hands were clasped in front of him, and a discreet black security badge hung from a clipped lanyard at his side. His posture was upright, but his expression was deferential. "Director Brooks," he said with a subtle nod. "This way, please. The boardroom has been prepared." Sienna gave a small, measured nod and followed him without hesitation. As they turned away from the main flow of passengers, the sound of suitcase wheels and light conversation faded behind a sealed corridor door. This hallway was different, quieter, carpeted in thick slate gray, and illuminated by recessed lighting that made the whole space feel like a hush held its breath. Few people knew this corridor existed. Even fewer had ever walked it. They arrived at a door marked, Board Executive Lounge Operations West. No nameplates, no excessive signage, just 4 words carved into frosted glass. The man held the door for her and stepped aside. Sienna walked in, her heels clicking softly against polished walnut flooring. Inside, 3 men were already standing, each in their 60s, each projecting decades of experience in capital stewardship, and each clearly trying not to show the unease tugging at the edges of their expressions. She recognized them immediately. William Crane, Chief Financial Officer of Meridian Atlantic Holdings. Silver hair, pinstriped suit, a man who spoke in debt curves and risk cushions. Thomas Venner, Head of Fleet Strategy. Thick-framed glasses, always tapping something. The man who had once promised that the sky is where we retake innovation. And Marcus Dale, Chief Innovation Officer. Younger, but already showing signs of corporate exhaustion. His tie was slightly loosened, and he held a pen like it was a lifeline. None of them had ever met her in person, but they all knew her name. "Ms. Brooks," Crane began, stepping forward with an outstretched hand and a corporate smile. "We weren't expecting you in Zurich until this afternoon. I trust your flight was adjusted," Sienna replied, her tone level. "The timeline required it." There was a pause. Venner was the first to speak next. "If this is about the propulsion specs, it isn't," Sienna cut in. She stepped further into the room and placed her folder on the table between them. "I'm not here to discuss hydrogen yield curves or fuselage weights." Dale straightened. "Then, this is about the disbursement." Sienna looked at him directly. "This is about culture. Silence. The kind that drops like a curtain over a room, dense and immediate." Crane cleared his throat. "We're aware of some feedback from the last few days." "No," Sienna said sharply. "You're aware of an incident report. A single passenger flagged for creating discomfort during a transatlantic flight. But what you're not aware of is how many systems failed in that single trip. Check-in, lounge access, cabin protocol, service equity, and what's worse, the consistency of the behavior suggests it wasn't just a lapse. It was standard operating culture." Venner raised his hands slightly. "With all due respect, Ms. Brooks, the flight staff don't represent the strategic core of. They are your brand," she said. "They are the first and last face every stakeholder interacts with. They're the ones executing your promise, and right now, your promise is broken." Crane, trying to regain footing, gestured toward her folder. "So how do you propose we move forward?" Sienna opened it with deliberate ease. Inside was a single sheet of paper, pristine, uncreased, with 2 bold lines printed at the top. Phase 3 disbursement temporary suspension notice effective immediately subject to board inclusion audit. Crane read it. Then read it again. "You're holding the next $94 million? Sienna nodded. "Level red protocol. I want the entire employee log from Flight 901 reviewed within the hour." Outside, Sienna walked calmly through the corridor toward the private elevator that would take her to her hotel suite. She didn't look satisfied. She didn't look victorious. She looked certain. The first domino had fallen, and by the end of the day, the rest would follow. By 10:05 a.m., the air inside Meridian Atlantic Holdings' Zurich operations suite was heavier than usual, humming with the low-pitched urgency of damage control. No alarms had sounded, no statements had been made, and yet everyone with eyes on the internal investment dashboard knew something had gone deeply wrong. The The Phase 3 disbursement, $94 million allocated for the final stretch of the hydrogen aircraft initiative, had been frozen. No press release. No advance notice. Just a quiet lock icon next to a funding line that had previously flowed like clockwork. At first, some assumed it was a glitch. Finance pinged legal. Legal pinged compliance. Compliance went silent. Then whispers began circling through Slack channels, encrypted messaging threads, and private chat rooms. Did you hear what happened on Flight 901? They didn't know the full story yet, but they knew a name. Sienna Brooks. The name that had only ever appeared in secure digital memos and high-level fund allocations was now on everyone's lips. And not with reverence anymore, with fear. Crane's office had transformed into a makeshift war room. Monitors glowed with real-time reports, video conference panels blinked in and out, and assistants darted in with paper trails that felt too analog for the speed of the crisis. Thomas Venner stood near the window, his tie askew, eyes fixed on his phone as updates kept rolling in. Stock is down 4% since open, he muttered, not looking up. That's before the street even knows what's really going on. Marcus Dale, the youngest of the three executives, sat slumped at the far end of the room, staring at a printed version of the one-page notice Sienna had handed them hours earlier. His fingers traced the bolded title, like it might disappear if he rubbed hard enough. Crane, pacing in tight circles, paused when a junior assistant entered the room, clutching a printout and looking appropriately pale. "Sir," she said, breathless, "we've traced back the entire employee interaction log from Flight 901. We've confirmed a sequence of events from check-in to in-flight service. Multiple touchpoints, same passenger, same behavioral pattern." "What pattern?" Crane snapped. "Dismissiveness. Profiling. Deviation from service protocol." Venner turned slowly, finally registering what she was saying. "So it wasn't just one moment." "No, sir," she replied. "It was all of them." "Get me names," Crane ordered. "Everyone who made contact with Ms. Brooks, from the gate agent to the flight lead. I want each one placed under temporary review." "But Sir HR..." "Now," he snapped. Dale raised his eyes. "This won't be enough." Crane looked at him, frowning. "What are you talking about? Placing a few employees on review?" Dale said, voice steadier than expected. "That's containment. It's not correction." Crane's jaw clenched. "We don't have time for philosophy, Marcus. We need control. And control won't come through silence anymore," Dale said. "Not with someone like her." A chime sounded from the main monitor. The investor dashboard had auto-pinged a critical alert. High-risk funding delay flag triggered partner entity, Bastion Trust. Outside investors would see it within the hour. By 10:45 a.m., news had leaked through secondary financial aggregators. The delay was tagged as strategic, which only fueled speculation. Was the hydrogen fleet facing technical issues? Were there environmental concerns? None of the narratives were accurate, but they all pointed to one thing: instability. And instability was poison in aviation. At 11:12 a.m., Meridian's internal chat channels lit up with a memo marked Urgent Policy Review Initiated. It was vague, written in corporate grayspeak, and full of passive voice. But those who knew how to read between the lines saw it for what it was: an apology. By noon, 3 employees had been suspended pending investigation. The lounge concierge at JFK, the gate agent who had asked Sienna to verify her method of payment, and notably Marcy Layton, the lead flight attendant on Flight 901, was removed from her rotation and placed on administrative leave. None of it had been requested by Sienna. That was what made it worse. She hadn't called the press. She hadn't posted a single tweet. She hadn't written a Medium essay decrying systemic exclusion. She had simply paused the money. And in doing so, she had paused everything. Across the Atlantic, in Midtown Manhattan, 3 different hedge funds flagged Meridian as high volatility. One downgraded its short-term rating within minutes. A top investment strategist whispered into a private forum, "If Sienna Brooks is backing away, it's time to look closer." At 12:47 p.m. Zurich time, the CFO of one of Meridian's key green tech partners sent an encrypted message to Crane's assistant. "We need assurance this isn't a deeper culture issue. Our ESG compliance rating is at risk." "What's being done?" The board met again, this time virtually, with 9 directors joining from across Europe and the US. They stared into webcams with the heavy resignation of people who understood that what was happening wasn't just a PR crisis. It was a mirror, and they didn't like what it showed. Back at her hotel, Sienna stood in front of a floor-to-ceiling window, watching Zurich's skyline shimmer under early afternoon sun. Her assistant sat on the couch behind her, tablet in hand. Stocks down 11.6%, the assistant reported quietly. 3 managers suspended. Legal scrambling to rewrite inclusion policy into ESG compliance language. Sienna didn't turn. She sipped her tea. Her phone buzzed again, another message from an internal contact. They're requesting a second meeting. Full board. Neutral setting. Thursday morning. She read it. Said nothing. You going? Her assistant asked. Sienna turned finally, set her tea down, and answered, calm and precise. Only if they're ready to ask the right question. There was a beat of silence. What's that? She met her assistant's eyes. Not, how do we fix this? Then she paused. But she hadn't yet decided if she would. She was here to see something first. If the echo had reached the walls where it mattered. A hand went up. An older woman near the front, with silver at her temples and a set of wings pinned to her lapel. She gave you a second chance, the woman said softly. Why? Marcy exhaled. I don't know. I've asked myself that a dozen times. But I think it's because she didn't want revenge. She wanted repair. Another hand. Peter, a former gate agent, spoke. I scanned her ticket 3 times. Not because I had to. Because I didn't think she belonged in that seat. I didn't even realize it until a week later. That's the part that keeps me up. Someone else added. I didn't know who she was. But I felt like I was supposed to doubt her. And I never asked myself why. Sienna watched as each voice found its footing. As each sentence carried not guilt, but recognition. Not performance, but responsibility. She had seen countless diversity workshops fail because they treated bias like a virus, something to be eradicated quickly. This wasn't that. This was a reckoning. When someone asked why she had agreed to let Meridian use her name in the new training framework, Marcy replied, she didn't offer her name. She offered a mirror. At that, Sienna finally stepped forward. She didn't take the front of the room. She stood to the side, near a potted plant wilting from neglect. Her suit was gray. No labels. No jewelry. No armor. Her presence quieted the room instantly. I'm not here to inspire you, she said, voice low but unshaken. I'm not here to congratulate this company for catching up. She let that sit for a moment. I'm here because people like me fly every day. We pay the same fares, wait in the same lines, and still carry the burden of having to prove we belong. Not because we've done anything wrong, but because we look like someone who might. No one shifted. No one blinked. That burden doesn't go away with a new seating policy or a memo from legal, she continued. It only goes away when people like you choose to see the full human in front of you. Not the stereotype. Not the assumption. But the actual person. She gestured to the room. You're the front line of trust. Before the engines start, before the seatbelt clicks, before the coffee is served, you are the first voice a traveler hears. And if that voice carries judgment, it shapes everything that follows. Her eyes moved to Marcy, then back to the room. Growth isn't easy. It shouldn't be. It happens through tension, through collision, through the uncomfortable moment of realizing you were wrong, and choosing not to let that be the end of the story. She paused. Let them absorb it. I didn't come here because I wanted applause. I came here because I saw an opening. And sometimes that's all a system needs to begin changing. At the far end, someone whispered, thank you. Sienna gave a quiet nod. Don't thank me, she said. Make room for the next passenger who doesn't look like they fit your script. Make eye contact. Ask better questions. Interrupt the pattern. As she turned to leave, Marcy called out gently. Ms. Brooks. One more thing. Sienna turned back. Marcy hesitated. What would you say to passengers who don't get to speak back the way you did? Sienna looked around the room once more, then answered. Make room for them to be seen. She paused. Because power doesn't always show up in suits or seat assignments. Sometimes it sits quietly in 2C, waiting to be treated like it matters. Then she walked out. The door clicked shut behind her, and the room remained still, not because she was gone, but because her words were still landing. And this time, no one was looking away. 2 weeks later, the first of Meridian Atlantic's next-generation hydrogen aircraft lifted off the runway under a pale spring sky. Its smooth ascent was captured in slow motion by media drones hovering nearby, and the takeoff made its way into dozens of online clips, many applauding the innovation, others raising cautious questions about whether the technology could truly reshape aviation. But buried beneath the media chatter, past the announcements and choreographed celebrations, something more fundamental had shifted. It wasn't in the engine design or the fuel cells. It was in the fine print of a new document quietly uploaded to Meridian Atlantic's passenger interface portal the night before the inaugural flight. Passenger Equity and Rights Charter co-authored by external consultants, community advocates, and one unlisted contributor. The first page read, "Every seat is a story. We exist to listen." It was a sentence simple enough to be missed, but potent enough to carry the weight of what had nearly undone the company from the inside. What Sienna Brooks had started, without a word to the press, without a hashtag or a headline, had now woven itself into the permanent DNA of a legacy airline. No single person had been credited for the transformation. No speeches had been delivered on grand stages. But people inside the company knew. They had felt the tremor when she pressed pause. And now, in small corners of the industry, her name carried a new kind of authority. Not the kind shouted from podiums, but the kind whispered behind closed doors when someone asked, "What happens if we don't change?" Inside the central terminal at JFK's Executive Concourse, a new section of the airline's elite lounge had opened. It looked nearly identical to the old one, same sleek furniture, same ambient lighting, but for the first time, it had been redesigned with consultation from accessibility experts, cultural equity advisors, and former passengers who had previously been told, in ways subtle and overt, that they did not belong. On the wall near the entrance was a plaque. It bore no dedication, no name, just a single sentence etched in brushed titanium. Presence does not require permission. That morning, a new group of flight attendants filed into the Meridian Atlantic Training Center for orientation. Among them was a young man named Kyle, 23, fresh from hospitality school, nervous and overly caffeinated. He found his seat among the others and stared at the agenda sheet in front of him. One of the sessions stood out, Equity in the Sky, Understanding Presence and Power, guest contributor, internal advisory panel. When the session began, the lights dimmed slightly, and a short video played. It wasn't dramatic. No dramatic music or emotional narration. It simply walked through the story of a passenger who had experienced multiple layers of exclusion, from check-in to boarding to in-flight service, and how each moment, though subtle, revealed a pattern so ingrained it had once gone unnoticed by everyone around her. It ended with a single quote across the screen: "Systems don't collapse from volume. They collapse from pressure, one withheld signature at a time." The room was quiet afterward. The trainer stepped forward and asked an open-ended question. "What would you have done differently?" No one answered right away. But slowly they began to speak. Not about policy, about awareness, about learning to see what had once gone invisible, and about the difference between following procedure and practicing presence. Across the city, in a modest office tower in downtown Manhattan, an investment roundtable had gathered to review ESG trends and the reputational risk factors emerging in post-pandemic industries. Bastion Equity had recently released its latest report, highlighting several companies whose internal policies now ranked higher in sustainability and inclusivity metrics. Meridian Atlantic was listed at the top. Beside the company name was a footnote: positive trajectory following internal restructuring and pause-based accountability protocols. Catalyst: non-public investor intervention based on internal audit exposure. No names, just facts. At 3:07 p.m., a message arrived in Sienna's private inbox. It was from the CEO of a mid-sized aviation startup seeking clean energy funding. The subject line read, "We saw what you did." Inside was a single sentence: "How do we build it right the first time?" She didn't respond immediately. She was walking, not into a boardroom, not toward a podium, but down a narrow sidewalk in Brooklyn, where her mother used to take her on Sunday afternoons to buy fresh tamarind and gossip with the neighbors. She wore jeans, a soft blazer, and white sneakers. No one recognized her. She liked it that way. She passed a small bookstore with a window display that read "Voices That Shift the Room," and smiled faintly. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. This one from Marcy Layton. Subject: update from the pilot group. We're officially rolling out the new program across all routes. 32 staff have volunteered to mentor new hires. One of them said, "I don't want to avoid another Flight 901. I want to make sure there's never a Flight 901 again." Thought you'd want to know. Sienna stopped walking. She stood there for a moment, letting the city move around her, the honks and chatter and click of heels on concrete, like a rhythm she didn't need to control. Then she typed, "That's the point. Not fear, not shame, just precision, just accountability." She didn't sign it. Marcy would know who it was from. That night, Sienna returned to her apartment and opened a file marked Disruption without drama notes on strategic silence. Inside were fragments of thoughts, clipped sentences, moments she hadn't spoken out loud during the Zurich meetings. She added a new line. The power to withhold is greater than the power to demand. Because the system depends on your signature more than your volume. She closed the file. Outside, the sky above New York was beginning to shift into its deep navy palette. Planes carved silver lines overhead, some on their way to Zurich, some to Tokyo, others to places less known. Sienna didn't need to be on any of them. She had already made her mark. Not in headlines, but in architecture. In the blueprint of what equity could look like when it didn't ask for applause, but for accountability. When it didn't scream, but simply moved the money, and let the silence tell the rest of the story. And somewhere, in a quiet conference room lit by fluorescent panels and hope, another group of new employees was reading a line etched into their training manuals. Respect isn't granted by policy. It's recognized by presence. And maybe, just maybe, someone in that room would look up, see a black woman in 2C on a future flight, and not see an anomaly or an inconvenience, but see her as exactly what she was, a mirror, a moment, and a message. That sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is not leave the room.